Thank you, Senator Carr. Senator Ludlam.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Dr Patterson, for coming in. The last couple of sessions of estimates, I've been trying to establish what share of isotope production is for domestic use as opposed to export. And last time I asked, you cited commercial in confidence and a certain amount of lack of transparency in the wider market as barriers to providing this information to us. You recall the last exchange, or maybe two exchanges that we've had? So Hansard won't pick up a nod.
I do recall the exchanges, Senator.
Thank you. So I was a bit perplexed to discover that you were very happy to give this information freely in a webinar on the 23rd of February, which was 2 weeks before I asked that same question in this forum. You stated in the webinar that Australia currently supplies 16 of the world's technetium medical isotope precursor molybdenum. And as Australia's consumption is generally around 1% of the world market, we just do the maths. Why were you happy to explain this to a webinar but not to a budget estimates committee?
Senator, if you recall our discussion, you were asking, in my view, and I reviewed the record. I reviewed the record of our discussion. You took a question on notice.
I did.
And you will see that we have supplied you the simple calculation information that you requested in that submission, which came out of the last Senate estimate. So the discussion, as I recall it, was I was attempting to determine the level of detail that you wanted and the basis on which the comparison would be made.
I don't need it to 2 decimal places. I just wanted to know how much of what you're producing is for export, how much is for domestic use. I don't feel like that's a national security matter.
So Senator, I believe that I was working with you to determine the level of information you wanted when it became clear at the end of your statements, right before you put the question on notice.
Yeah. You
indicated that you wanted a very simple view of this.
I'm a simple person.
And we've provided it. The numbers you requested have been provided in answers to your questions. So we were not dissimulating. We were simply clarifying what your requirement was. And once that requirement became clear, we supplied you with the information.
So what proportion of the isotopes that you produce are for domestic use as opposed to international exports?
I'll find it. Yeah. As we submitted into the question on notice, currently approximately 28% of molybdenum-99 produced by ANSTO is used domestically. Approximately 72% of MO99 produced by ANSTO is exported, meeting a global need for access to life-saving nuclear medicines.
28%. Thank you very much. You also, and I should have said at the outset, thanks for providing that material. I noticed you also, in that same batch, put to us that Moly 99 is priced to ensure full cost recovery, and the pricing includes, you've listed the cost of manufacture, the cost of treatment, final disposal of wastes. I could argue with you about that, but you've put that there, resulting from the manufacturing process and the future decommissioning costs of the manufacturing plant. Can you confirm for us, though, that the costs of infrastructure, the plant construction in the first place, and insurance are not included?
So in the case of the new nuclear medicine facility, which is being built at present, that is by means of a government loan which will be repaid. And so the cost of the facility will indeed be recovered as the loan is repaid and the dividends are paid to government from a fully costed business case.
What about your current plant?
In terms of the current plant, it is towards the latter end of its life. It has very limited residual value, and that residual value and the current condition of the marketplace leads to a positive cash flow position that would fully recover any costs related to that plant.
Okay. So it's, I mean, it would be, what about insurance?
So the insurances that we have are organised through ComCover and are consistent with the liability regime for facilities like ours. And those insurance costs are actually quite low for an organisation like ANSTO, and have come down every year over the last 8 years because of the good insurance performance of ANSTO relative to the requirements of the insurer.
Yeah, sorry. Are your insurance costs calculated into your full cost recovery? Are they actually there, or are they sitting on some separate sheet somewhere?
They will be embedded in there.
No, will be, or they are at the moment?
At present, they are not costed in the supply that we make internationally.
So you're priced to ensure full cost recovery as long as we ignore the fact that you've written off the cost of your plant and you don't include insurance. It's not really full cost recovery, is it?
It's making a positive margin, so it is recovering all of its costs and generating a margin, and that is the definition of a fair competition basis.
Did ANSTO not make a loss of more than $200 million in your Molly 99 production last year?
No.
No. I've got a $156 million government subsidy and an overall loss of more than $200 million. If that figure's incorrect, how much money does ANSTO actually return to the taxpayer if I'm in error and there's not a loss but there's in fact a profit, which full cost recovery I guess would imply? Then what's the net benefit to the Commonwealth budget from ANSTO's existence?
So the benefit to the Commonwealth from ANSTO's existence is in the operational funding of ANSTO, we fully pay our way. That is both by way of appropriation and by market performance. There are a number of items that form part of the statutory accounts which are not part of that equation. And I'll give just one example.
Okay.
Under the education infrastructure funding, there was no additional depreciation capital provided from the construction of those facilities because of the rules under which they were built.
Right.
And so the costs of those facilities are written off below the line in the statutory accounts that generate some of that loss. There are also adjustments to our decommissioning provisions. All of our decommissioning provisions are held centrally in government. And as the adjustments take place for different interest rates and different mixes of foreign exchange, those statutory accounts are adjusted. Sometimes it's a good guy and sometimes it's a bad guy.
Okay.
And so the statutory loss should not be confused in any way with the operating position of ANSTO, is that we have, over the last period of years, pretty much had a break-even position, slightly up or slightly down by a couple of $100,000. And it is the operating accounts that measure our contribution to the Commonwealth. If you integrate all of ANSTO, now including the synchrotron into the broader government accounts, we are responsible for generating from the open market around about $82 to $85 million a year.
When I net out your research budget, I think that's where we arrive at the $200 million loss figure. So would you disagree with us doing that? When I look at your overall accounts, you're a net drain on the Commonwealth's finances, and I'm presuming a fairly substantial chunk of that comes out of your research budget. So
our research budget operates the facilities that are attached to the Opal reactor. It operates now the synchrotron and a number of other facilities. So we have a large number of instrument scientists and researchers who support the users who come to ANSTO. Those users do not pay fees in merit-based access programs because it is the normative position that was taken by the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics that merit-based programs are free at the point of access.
Huh.
So it's impossible to show those as notional losses relative to the income generation activities that we have.
It's not just for nuclear research, is it? That must be a much broader principle.
Our research and our support for researchers across Australia is everything from agriculture to zoology.
Yeah.
That's the nature of our business.
Okay. Can you tell us what percentage of isotopes produced from the facility are actually bought? It's a bit puzzling and difficult to tell from your accounts what you produce, what isotopes are produced for commercial benefit, which then generate a source of revenue back to ANSTO and thereby the Commonwealth, and what are being produced either as a byproduct of that, which would have no sales value, or being produced for research purposes. Is there any way of disaggregating the two?
So the research use of isotopes is dominantly takes place in our Camperdown facility, where we produce fluorine-18, carbon-15, oxygen-11. These are cyclotron-based isotopes which are used for different types of clinical development of new imaging techniques and and for developing new drugs and understanding the biological function of human living systems. So that is a research cost for the production of those isotopes. There are small amounts of isotopes which we support their inclusion into clinical trials. We do that under a very careful set of rules that ensures that should those clinical trials be successful, that we will be able to sell into the market the isotopes we produce that have supported the clinical trials. So we've got very good protocols on that, which are very clear. We also sometimes undertake trials with stable isotopes, which are sourced from different jurisdictions. These are not radioactive isotopes, but with our careful tracing capabilities, we can make use of those isotopes as well. So all of those functions are properly costed as research costed programs. We monitor the outcome of those programs. We measure the impact of those programs in terms of benefits that accrue to Australia. Some of those benefits are healthcare benefits and are measured by the types of social economics metrics that the consultancies are very familiar with. That part of our business is really to support outcomes that will lead to future health outcomes that will be beneficial to Australia.
Okay. The Nuclear Energy Agency found in 2016 that global demand for technetium has actually fallen by 25% in the preceding 4 years. Are you comfortable with me quoting that statistic at you, or do you contest that?
I think that overall global demand is fairly similar in terms of the number of doses, but happily what has happened is with the development of better imaging technologies, less technetium is used per imaging event.
Okay.
And so what we're seeing is a 3% growth overall globally in the amount of technetium that is required. That varies very much dependent on the United States market, which is the dominant market in the world. What we're seeing, I think, is developing countries and emerging economies are taking a far greater interest in technetium. It remains the cheapest and most widely used isotope for 80% of diagnostic procedures using nuclear medicine.
Oh, okay.
That'll continue to be the case in the future. But countries which have asked us to explore expanded use of technetium-99m include, for example, China. And China at the moment, as a nation, uses about half the amount of technetium-99m every week that Australia uses every week. So you can see that China, even just doubling their utilisation would start to be a massive player. But they have very strong intentions in terms of their healthcare futures that they've modelled to potentially rapidly develop that market.
Okay. I'll try and keep my questions a bit shorter if you can also be concise with your answers, just because I'm presuming other senators have some...
It's a complicated market, Senator.
I know it is, and I'm asking complicated questions. Yep. The NEA also said, though, that their projected growth over the next couple of years was just 1.22% annually, and that there are new moly production facilities planned in the next 5 years, at least that they have identified in Europe, North America, South America, and the Far East. How much analysis have you done to ensure that you're not about to be competing in an oversupplied market? There's flat growth rates and a number of other big plants coming online. How do we know that we're not going to end up with a stranded asset as there's a glut?
So we analyse all of the projects that are in view in the future. Most of the projects that are coming on stream at national levels are intended only to address national needs. The non-reactor-based techniques have proven very difficult to make economic, and a number of the other projects in the United States, I think, will eventually start to produce technetium-99m, but because they're going straight to technetium-99m, which has a very short half-life, the scalability of those projects is quite difficult.
So as in it's harder to develop an export market?
Say again?
Is it harder to develop an export market with those?
I think exporting technetium-99m directly is really almost impossible.
Okay.
It's very difficult, actually. We've looked, and we continue to work on these models. We do model the accelerator performance to produce technetium-99m, for instance, in the Sydney setting. We don't think with the type of size of the city and the logistics that you'd require that Sydney could get away with just one facility producing technetium-99M.
So can you just break it down for me? Your options are to produce Moly-99, which is the precursor isotope with a
Yep.
longer half-life. You can stick it in a fridge and fly it around the world.
Yep.
Or multiple particle accelerators sort of salted around the place that don't use reactors,
Yep.
but that actually produce the technetium directly.
So
Those
that's
are kind of our two pathways.
So, and there's possibly a third pathway, which is sort of alternatives to the direct production of technetium-99M.
Do you want to maybe provide us with some of them on notice? I'm worried I'm testing the chair's patience, but if there's a third, if there are other edge cases out there, do you want to just provide us with those?
Absolutely, yeah, we track these all the time because it's important as an accelerator organisation as well, because we're not just a reactor organisation, that we can bring our knowledge of accelerator technology to bear on this.
And you understand, I presume, that the only problem I have with ANSTO is the bloody reactor. It's not the expertise that you've developed over time in particle accelerators.
What's your problem with the reactor?
More broadly, is that it's generating nuclear waste that will still kill people in 500,000 years.
So,
Senator, and later in budget estimates, I have to go and talk to the industry department about the Aboriginal communities that they're traumatising, trying to dump this waste on. I do have a problem with it.
All right, I think that we're probably.
Oh, I can move on. I've asked you to take a couple on notice. Sorry, I was being trolled, and I shouldn't have been.
Through you, Chair, it is the hardest working 20 megawatt class reactor in the world. It is a beautiful reactor and it's doing wonderful work.
All right.
Thank
Now I'm being trolled also by Dr. Patterson. Dr. Patterson,
Last question, Senator Ludlam.
we've become aware through the JSCOT process that in June 2016 you signed the 2005 Framework Agreement for International Collaboration on Research and Development of Generation 4 nuclear reactors. And I've got a couple of quick questions on this. Nuclear power reactors are actually prohibited in Australia under national law. So under what authority did you sign an agreement to promote research and development on nuclear reactors?
Thank you. Thank you very much. So in signing that agreement, we had been through a process of discussion with the department and with the relevant ministers, indicating that in order to retain appropriate knowledge about the future of nuclear power globally, it would be a virtuous outcome to join the Gen 4 International Forum. The Gen 4 International Forum is not intended to deploy reactors in its own right, but to build up knowledge to understand which future reactor technologies might be good in terms of low proliferation, low costs, and more effective and sustainable safety cases. So therefore, the Generation 4 International Forum is not directly associated with the production of nuclear power, but the production of knowledge to give options to society so that they can actually make choices in the future. I understand that it is the position of the major parties in Australia that we need to understand the future of nuclear in order to make choices in the future. It is the job of ANSTO to provide that knowledge base. It is not the job of ANSTO to provide advocacy for nuclear power in Australia, but to provide knowledge that protects us from poor decisions and provides us with a seat at the table at the International Atomic Energy Agency.
We already have that. Sorry, with great respect, we already have that seat. You didn't have to sign. You didn't have to sign the Gen 4 agreement to retain our seat at the IAEA.
It was one of my proudest moments as the CEO of ANSTO to sign that agreement, and we're now going through the treaty process. I think it is the right thing to do for Australia.
Were there any additional costs?
The cost of membership will be of the order of $100,000 a year. We are drawing on the knowledge and base and the work that we already do as ANSTO, so we won't be developing significant new program capabilities to do this. We have not asked government to fund that $100,000. We're absorbing it in our appropriation.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Ludlam. I think we're